I'm Micki Caskey, and I welcome you to the Graduate School of Education at Portland State. I think you got a perfect day for the umbrella tour. I see that you need umbrellas. I'm hoping that you'll have an enjoyable time listening for a few moments to me talk about middle grades research. I've given you a handout that kind of outlines some of my recent projects and publications, some of my teaching, and my leadership and service. So you get a sense of how things are interwoven in my life here as a middle grades researcher. And that is what my primary responsibility is here as middle grades research. So your first question might be, well, what's middle grades? Well, it's really about the education of 10 to 15-year-olds. So students that are in maybe K-8 schools, middle schools, junior highs, anywhere in the spectrum that we serve 10 to 14-year-olds. So my research really focuses on those areas and the people that work with those children, the teachers. And so let me just start by saying I'm going to use the not the PowerPoint, but the web a couple times to show you some of the projects. I've also laid out some of the products that I've developed over the last few years so that you can take a look at those. Also, you may be interested in two research summaries that I co-authored. So I'll make these available. I'll start passing them around. I'll pass one around, then the other. They're very similar, but because they focus on young adolescents, one more on their developmental characteristics. So if you don't know who those kids are, that'll give you a description of them. I mean, we were all once a young adolescent, but that's one of my areas of expertise. One of these books is also about how do we work with young adolescents. They're a very challenging group. I'll tell you, I actually taught that age group for 19 years. I did that before I came to Portland State. I also taught 2 years in high school and found it much more engaging for me professionally and personally to work with young adolescents because they're very interested in exploring their world and forming their identity. So that became my passion, and that's where I do a lot of my writing and my research. Then the second piece is about what schools can do to serve that particular population. And these are just little quick summaries you may be interested in. Let me go over here and go ahead and turn on the web page that I wanted to show you. And this kind of will characterize some of the work that I'm engaged in. My life is very fortunate as an academic because I can bring my research, my teaching, and my service all together. And one way that I do that is I actually do I designed this web page, and one of my services is to present and develop this website for the Middle Level Education Research SIG, the Special Interest Group. It's one of American Education Research Association's special interest groups. So back in around 2001, I developed this site. So that was one of my areas of service. Well, now I actually serve as the president of this association. So through the years, I've taken on greater and greater responsibility for the survival of this particular association. And it's really thriving. One of the things I want to showcase is this National Middle Grades Research Program. This is some of the work that I'm intimately involved in, which is to really help focus middle grades researchers on topics that we can study together. On the table, you'll see a binder. It's a training manual. We've actually trained, as I've described on the one handout, more than 60 researchers across the country in how to use different kinds of observation and interview protocols. In order to develop this program, we spent about a year studying the problems in education, and one of the problems we came across was common planning time. This is a time when teachers get together and they work collaboratively on curriculum topics, instructional strategies, but primarily we think they just talk about the students they teach. But we really don't know what they do during common planning time. Why did we choose that topic? Well, because we know that common planning time is highly correlated with higher academic achievement for students. So what are those teachers doing during common planning time that makes a difference for students? And that's why we decided on this topic, which was a qualitative research study, to find out what teachers are saying and doing during common planning time. So our researchers will actually go in and do observation using the protocols we developed, and then they'll go and interview the teachers following that observation of this meeting. This may inform us as to how we can disseminate the information about what teachers are doing in this common planning time that really makes a difference for young adolescents. You may be aware that we have a dropout crisis in high school. We think the antecedents of this are actually in earlier grades. that as early as 6th grade you can predict whether or not students are going to be successful, and they look at things like the amount of absences, their behavioral referrals, and whether or not they failed a class or two. So we think we're positioning ourselves well in this middle grades research project to inform the nation about what are some good practices teachers can be engaged in that will help to retain students in school. So this is just the first phase. We've done it over a 2-year period. The second phase will start about a year from now once we develop the quantitative instruments, and then that second phase will complement the first phase. So we look at our research as a long-time investment. Another project that I'm involved in more locally is the Content Area Teachers Network. This particular research project was funded by the Carnegie Corporation and a Title II grant from the U.S. Department of Education. What we did is we worked with middle school teachers, 3 schools across the state in 3 different locations, one in an urban location, one in a coastal location, and one in the desert. And we actually worked with those teachers about how they could come together and plan instruction that enriched the literacy experiences of their students. So our focus was on adolescent literacy and how can content area teachers increase the amount of time students spend engaged with text, engaged with writing. That's another area we know that there's some really daunting statistics about the rates of passing on these reading and writing tests for middle school and high school students. So we think if we focus our energy working with teachers, we can make a difference for what's happening for those students. This was a 2-year project, and what we ended up with is a lot of products. You could actually go back to this website later and actually see some of the lesson plans that these teams came up with that actually allowed them to collaborate. And when we looked at their interview data after we studied the project, what they talked about is that they had an opportunity to collaborate with one another, and something unique to this project, they actually had opportunities to watch each other teach. And so they, again, were getting professionally developed by seeing how each other work with young adolescents. So this is another one of the research projects I've been involved in. I'd like to take you now to a place that's very dear to my heart, and that is the website of the National Middle School Association. I've been a member of the National Middle School Association since about 1990. I was a classroom teacher at that time. About 10 years ago, I came to Portland State as a young assistant professor, and over the last 10 years, I've gradually moved up the ranks, and I'm pleased to say that I am now a full professor. So I've been able, through having associations like this one with a national organization, to have a national reputation. This is what I think the university has in mind with their scholars, is that no, we don't only work here locally, but we also work on the national level. Well, I actually am the chair of this research advisory board for the National Middle School Association, and they really are focused again on the same thing that middle level education research SIG is. How do we prepare teachers, how do we work with teachers to advantage young adolescents? So these 2 groups really intersect, and many of the members serve in both organizations. One of the projects that I was involved in as the chair was writing these research summaries, and there is a plethora of them. If you wanted to know anything, we've been doing them since about 2006. We updated all the old ones and wrote new ones. Some of the ones that I was involved in were the characteristics of young adolescents and schools for young adolescents. But there's a lot of other ones that may be interesting to teachers and principals in the schools. This is a service we do, is to actually author these research summaries, or we solicit other authors to write them. For example, this one on vocabulary teaching and learning across the disciplines was authored by 2 well-known literacy scholars. So we really contacted them, and then they wrote this piece that's now a research summary. These are freely available to teachers and administrators, parents, or other groups who are interested in a summary of the research, who don't have time to read one of these books, but might be interested in reading a summary, and those are the 2 documents I gave you. What we are trying to do is put recent research in the hands of teachers and administrators, policymakers. That's one of our goals. Another part of my work with the National Middle School Association, I'm actually the editor for their research journal, the Research in Middle Level Education Online. This also gives me an opportunity to read a lot of the research as it's coming out. Across my email come these articles, these manuscripts. And so I get hundreds of manuscripts in the last few years, and then they become published on this website. Because this is an open access directory, all of the articles will be published every month. So a researcher doesn't have to wait as long to be published online as they might in a journal that is a print journal. Not that we still don't want print journals. We still like those, and we still want to have those outlets. But this is another outlet, and you'll see that this has been going on for many years now. They put one issue out a month, and it shortens the timeline to get researchers' work. So there's senior researchers as well as novice researchers whose work is being showcased on this website. It's also an international peer-reviewed journal, which means that people from around the world access this research, and then they cite it in their work. So this is one more opportunity for me to be engaged with the National Middle School Association, but it keeps me fresh on the research. So I'm not just sitting back in my office, reading my own work. I'm really interested in what others are doing. Two of the products that have come from this that I think are important for practitioners, for teachers and principals, are these two booklets that I've put on the table, these two short monographs. These are a compilation of articles around, some of them from this journal and some from some other journals, around some thematic issues. It's one of my ideas that we need to be able to put portable materials, because we're not always connected to the internet. And we might have a meeting where we sit around the table and do a book group around some of these topics. This one is on middle grades teachers and teacher education. The first one was on young adolescents. So I think we need the online presence, but we also need that portable book presence to be out there with middle grades researchers, policymakers, and teachers and principals. I thought I should give you some time to ask me some questions. But I will also point out, before I ask for your questions, that I listed what I do as far as teaching and service. So I'm not just working here at the university. I'm also very invested in working in Portland Public Schools. I work in Park Rose School District and Reynolds School District. I have partnerships in those 3 school districts. And I also teach in this program. I work in the any teachers K to 12. The other thing I do is I teach courses in the literacy program, and I teach action research. So those are some of my interests, and I'm sure you might have some questions now. Yes?
I understand that you're talking about 10 to 15, did you say?
Yes.
Well, obviously, with all the work that you've done in this field, do you have a preference in terms of how it's formulated, otherwise K through 8 or junior high or middle school or that kind of thing?
Grade configuration is an interesting topic, and it is one that I stay pretty well versed in. A couple of my colleagues actually write the research summaries around that area. My biggest concern is what are the programs and practices in those schools. Often schools are constructed like K-12 schools in rural Oregon because that's how economically they can deliver service. But you can still have a good program if you make sure that you have academic rigor for these young adolescents, as well as a full exploratory program. I actually, when Portland went through its transition to start making K-8s, I talked with several parent groups who were concerned. And I said, please don't be as concerned about grade configuration as what's going on inside those buildings. We want to make sure that teachers are well prepared to understand the developmental characteristics of the children they work with, and that the schools have adequate resources to provide a full exploration program so that they actually have an opportunity to have some of the music and the art, some of the opportunities to explore clubs and other programs while they're in school. In addition to that, we want to make sure that they actually have good academic offerings so that young people can have advanced math if that's what they need, so that they can be ready for going to high school. So I think those are the conversations, is what are we doing to make sure that students transition from whatever configuration to the next configuration and make it seamless so we don't have these big bumps. We don't lose a lot of ground with the kids.
So yes. You don't have a preference?
Not particularly, no. You know, the National Middle School Association is about middle school, schools that serve young adolescents, not necessarily the grade configuration of 6th to 8th grade.
I was curious, a wealth of information, how do you get it to the average teacher who's out there working with these kids? How do you stimulate them to be interested in that? when they're already pretty overwhelmed
Yeah.
with their jobs and the additional problems they have because of our social support.
And I think that is one of our dilemmas. You know, I gave you a couple of pieces of paper. Some of them may be hard-pressed to find time to read those. Some of the other products that we've developed were some electronic products on this National Middle School website. If we go back to this page, I can show you there's some advocacy tools at the top, and these advocacy tools are ones that we use with teachers and principals, and they can be done in as small as a 6-minute sound bite or as much as 20 minutes. So they are actually full products that look like a PowerPoint, but they're automatic, so they actually have a narrator and they talk. And that makes it really easy for teachers to stay current, is to be able to put tools in their hands that are free and readily accessible and in short sound bites. The other thing we can do is we can stay connected. I try to stay connected through the local organizations. I'm on the Portland Council of the International Reading Association, so I talk about adolescent literacy there. That's an association that has a lot of teacher representatives. And I also serve on the Oregon Middle Level Association, which is, again, a group comprised of teachers and principals. And so then we can disseminate the information that way, and we go out into the schools. I think that's what they want, is someone who can come on out, not just stay here and have people come in. Yes?
The middle school, for the student that's at Portland State, how many, do you have a large group that want to teach middle school, or are there a lot of people avoiding middle school?
That's a great question. And you know what happens is most of our candidates, they come in, they want to be elementary school teachers or they want to be high school teachers. Now we also have some that are interested in early childhood. But we do not have a lot of students saying, I want to teach middle school. But we have a core group. What we can do each year is we can build that core group, because as soon as I put one of those high school teachers in a middle school, they can start to fall in love with those young adolescents, because they are less apathetic and more engaged and more engaging. They're really interested in what the teachers have to say. So I think once they get in the middle school, we have them won over. Excuse me just a minute.
We have time for one more question for our next stop.
I have a question. My husband's a former middle school teacher, and one of his chief complaints, I guess you would say, is in the middle school he felt that even if they weren't the students weren't passing classes, they still could advance to high school, and he felt that was problematic. And I was
Right.
just wondering what your...
Well, social promotion is a dilemma, but so is retention. Both of those have really negative consequences for students. I think what we have to do is we have to focus more on making sure that every student reaches the skills that they need or attains the skills they need to be able to move on. And that might mean that we have to regroup for instruction during the academic year. And I think a lot of schools are being more flexible about that. They're actually grouping and regrouping their students as the school year goes on, so that there's less of that passing them on. Because if we pass them on, they're not adequately prepared at the next level. Unfortunately, if we retain them, the evidence is if you retain a student more than twice, they're really not likely to graduate from high school. And you know, as if you're not likely to graduate from high school, then it's increased incidence of being incarcerated. So retention is not the answer either. So is there some middle ground in between? I think through after-school programs, summer programs, extensive tutoring, and intensive education, we should be able to ameliorate some of those problems and not have social promotion. Yeah, sure.
I'm on a board of a nonprofit that has done Fulbright pays and outside of Fulbright pays and taking teachers to applicant groups. Is there a set of components that we could work with so that if we've got those people that want to go, they know the kinds of emphasis they should be? I'm interested in how you're saying this is about advocacy, working advocacy into teachers. Very short set that we should be focusing on, or do you do to prepare that you suggest for preparing the teachers that go in groups to other countries?
One of the things I try to do is tell them that a lot of the research that's been done has been done on Caucasian students in developed countries, and so that some of the materials that they've read may not be appropriate or may not really inform them about the local context. So it's really about they're going to have to do their homework and maybe be better observers of the culture as they arrive. to learn about how young adolescents move through their developmental age. Other countries may not have the same experiences that our young adolescents have, so they may have different rites of passage. So I think we have to be open to that and not think that there's a cookie cutter approach. Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you.